There are fates in the 41st millennium that transcend death itself. To fall in battle is an honor. To be interred within a Dreadnought sarcophagus is considered sacred. But to be a blood angel, entombed in walking adamantium while the black rage consumes your mind, is something else entirely. It is to exist between two eternities, one of endless war, the other of endless madness. It is to fight not just the enemies of the Imperium, but the ghost of your own Primarch's death, replayed in your consciousness like a wound that never heals. This is the reality for the Death Company Dreadnoughts of the Blood Angels and their successor chapters. Warriors who have given everything, only to have everything taken from them again. To understand their existence, we must first understand the curse that defines them, the genetic flaw that has haunted the sons of Sanguinius for 10,000 years. The Black Rage, a Primarch's death. Echo. The Black Rage is not merely madness. It is not simple battle fury or the berserker state that can overtake any warrior in the heat of combat. The Black Rage is a psychic wound carved into the very genome of every blood angel, a scar that will never heal because it was inflicted at the moment of their gene father's death. When Sanguinius, the great angel, faced Horus aboard the War Master's flagship during the final hours of the Horus heresy, he knew he was walking toward his own death. His precognitive visions had shown him this moment countless times. He had seen the vengeful spirit's corridors slick with blood. He had felt the weight of Horus's corrupted power crushing down upon him. And yet he went anyway, because that is what duty demanded. That is what love for his father, the Emperor, required. The duel was brief and utterly one-sided. Horus, bloated with the power of all four Chaos Gods, was beyond anything a Primarch alone could defeat. But Sanguinius fought anyway. He fought with every ounce of nobility and fury that defined him. And in his final moments, as Horus's claws tore through his perfect form, as his life's blood spilled across cold metal deck plates, Sanguinius released a psychic death scream of such magnitude that it echoed through the warp itself. Every blood angel felt it. From the flagship to Terra itself, thousands of his sons felt their Primarch die. They felt his pain, his sorrow, his rage at the betrayal. And more than that, they felt his final thoughts, his last visions, his ultimate sacrifice. The psychic impact was so profound that it literally rewrote portions of their genetic code. The gene seed extracted from Sanguinius's body after his death carried this trauma encoded within it, a biological memory of death and fury. For most blood angels, the Black Rage remains dormant, a shadow at the edge of consciousness. They feel it on the eve of battle sometimes, a whisper of ancient fury in their blood. Some can go their entire service without succumbing. Others fall to it gradually, over centuries of war. But when it strikes fully, when the psychic imprint overwhelms the present reality, a blood angel ceases to be who they were. They believe with absolute conviction that they are Sanguinius. They see the Horus heresy raging around them. The year is not 99999 to M41 or 01 to M42, but the final days of the Siege of Terra. Their battle brothers are not the warriors fighting beside them, but the heroes and traitors of that ancient war. The enemy, whoever they might actually be, becomes Horus's forces. Orcs become world eaters. Tyranids become demons. Everything filters through the lens of that primordial trauma, and there is no cure. Once the Black Rage fully takes hold, it does not release its grip. The afflicted warrior is lost to their chapter, lost to themselves. They are inducted into the Death Company, painted in black armor, marked with red saltires, and sent into the most desperate battles with the expectation that they will find peace in death. Because death, for one consumed by the Black Rage, is the only peace that remains. This is the curse that every blood angel lives with. This is the shadow that hangs over the sons of Sanguinius, from the newest scout to Commander Dante himself, oldest of all living space marines. And even the ancient, the venerable, those who have already sacrificed their mortal forms to serve eternally as dreadnoughts, even they are not immune. The sarcophagus, a prison within a prison. To understand what it means to be a Death Company dreadnought, you must first understand what it means to be a dreadnought at all. The process of internment is not preservation, it is transformation, radical and irreversible. When a space marine suffers wounds so catastrophic that even the advanced arts of the chapter's apothecaries cannot repair them, a decision must be made. If the warrior is deemed worthy, if their service and sacrifice have earned them this dubious honor, they are taken to the chapter's tech marines and prepared for internment. What follows is as much amputation as surgery. Everything deemed non-essential is removed. Legs that can no longer walk are cut away. Arms that can no longer wield weapons are severed. Often, only the torso remains, a ribcage containing vital organs, and most importantly, the brain and spinal column. This remnant of a once mighty warrior is then placed within an amniotic tank, a sarcophagus of armor glass and blessed ceramite designed to sustain biological life in the most minimal form possible. The amniotic fluid that fills the tank serves multiple purposes. It suspends the body, reducing the stress on damaged organs and atrophied muscles. It maintains a stable neurochemical environment, preventing the degradation that would come from exposure to air and light. It delivers nutrients directly into the bloodstream and removes waste products. In many ways, the space marine within exists in a state similar to a fetus in the womb, curled and dependent, never to be born into freedom again. Neural interfaces are installed, threading through the brain tissue like technological roots. These mind impulse units connect the warrior's consciousness directly to the dreadnought's machine spirit, creating a link so complete that the boundary between flesh and metal becomes philosophical rather than practical. The dreadnought's optical sensors become the warrior's eyes. Its audio receptors become his ears. The massive limbs, the crushing power fists, the roaring weapon systems, all of these become extensions of will, as natural as fingers once were. But natural is not the same as comfortable. The sensory experience of being a dreadnought is fundamentally alien to human perception. Vision comes as a cascade of data, targeting reticules and threat assessments overlaying everything. Sound is filtered, prioritized, analyzed for tactical value before it reaches consciousness. Touch is translated through pressure sensors and structural integrity readings. Even the dreadnought's synthesized voice, the grinding mechanical approximation of speech that emanates from its voxcasters, sounds foreign to the warrior whose throat it replaces. And then there is the isolation. When not needed for battle, dreadnoughts are placed in stasis, their systems powered down, their consciousness suspended in darkness. Centuries can pass between awakenings. Brothers in arms age and die. Entire campaigns are fought and won without the ancient warrior's knowledge. When they wake, the world has moved on without them, and they are strangers in their own chapter, relics whose only purpose is war. This is the existence of every dreadnought, regardless of chapter or circumstance. It is an existence of service without end, of duty carried beyond death, of sacrifice that demands everything and offers only purpose in return. For most chapters, this is understood as both blessing and curse, an honor that carries immeasurable cost. But for a Blood Angel dreadnought, there is another dimension to this imprisonment, because the sarcophagus, for all its technological marvels, cannot shield the warrior within from the psychic legacy encoded in their gene seed. The Black Rage can still find them, even in their adamantium shell, perhaps especially there, where there is nothing left to distract from the visions, nothing to ground consciousness, except the endless cycle of sleep and slaughter. When two curses become one, the Blood Angels bear not one curse but two, twin genetic flaws, that work in terrible synchronization to push the sons of Sanguinius toward damnation. Understanding both is essential to comprehending the full horror of what a Death Company dreadnought endures. The Red Thirst came first, manifesting even before the heresy, though its origins remain shrouded in mystery and chapter secrecy. Some whisper that Sanguinius himself bore this flaw from his earliest days, that the mutation the ruinous powers inflicted during his gestation in the warp left him with an unnatural hunger. Others claim it emerged from the radiation-blasted wastelands of Baal Secundus, where the Blood Angel's Primarch first drew breath, and the chapter's aspirants still endure their trials. Whatever its source, the Red Thirst is a hunger that can never be fully satisfied. It manifests as an overwhelming craving for blood, specifically the blood of enemies slain in battle. When the thirst rises during combat, Blood Angels find themselves driven to acts of savagery that shame their noble image. They tear at fallen foes with their teeth. They drink deeply from opened arteries. They become, however briefly, the very monsters that Imperial propaganda claims all Space Marines to be. For a warrior still possessing arms and a mouth, the Red Thirst can at least be temporarily sated. The blood flows, the hunger is fed, and control can be reasserted. But for a dreadnought, whose only mouth is a voxcaster and whose only hands are weapons of war, the thirst becomes torment without relief. The craving rises with battle fury, demanding satisfaction that cannot be given. This is why Moriar the Chosen, the first and most famous Death Company dreadnought, required special modifications to his sarcophagus. The Blood Angels Tech Marines, in their wisdom or their desperation, created a system that could feed blood directly into the amniotic tank, allowing the ancient warrior to at least partially satisfy the genetic curse that consumed him. The specifics remain a closely guarded secret of the chapter, but the necessity speaks to the suffering involved. Even in death, even in service eternal, the thirst finds ways to torment those who bear Sanguinius's blood. But the Red Thirst, terrible as it is, pales before the Black Rage. Where the thirst is hunger, the rage is madness. Where the thirst can be momentarily satisfied, the rage is absolute and eternal once it takes hold. The two curses are separate, distinct afflictions with different origins and different effects. But when they occur together in a single warrior, the result is catastrophic. A Blood Angel in the grip of the Black Rage does not merely crave blood. They believe they are their Primarch, reliving his final hours in an endless loop of psychic trauma. Every battle becomes the siege of terror. Every enemy becomes a traitor to the Emperor's dream. Time collapses into that single moment of ultimate betrayal, and nothing can break the vision's hold. For a dreadnought, this creates a unique nightmare. The sensory deprivation of the sarcophagus, the isolation from normal human experience, makes the visions of the Black Rage even more vivid and inescapable. There are no physical sensations to ground consciousness in the present. There is only the machine-filtered reality of combat and the overwhelming psychic memory of ancient death. Imagine existing in darkness, suspended in fluid, with no body to feel and no world to touch. Then imagine that darkness suddenly fills with the most traumatic moment. In your gene line's history, you are walking the vengeful spirit's corridors. You are Sanguinius, most noble of the Primarchs, approaching the throne room where your beloved brother has become a monster. You feel his wings spread wide despite their wounds. You feel his sword heavy with the weight of duty. You feel his heart's beating with knowledge of doom. And then Horus is there, towering and terrible, wreathed in the power of the dark gods. You try to reason with him. You plead for the brother you once knew to return. But there is no brother left in that twisted form. Only malice and ambition and the hunger for godhood. The battle begins. You fight with everything you have. You land the strike that cracks his armor, the wound that will allow your father to ultimately triumph. But it is not enough. His claws find your chest. Your perfect blood spills. Your wings shatter. Your consciousness begins to fade. And then you wake in a dreadnought shell, surrounded by enemies, and the cycle begins again. Because that is the nature of the Black Rage when it takes a dreadnought. The vision does not play once and release its victim. It loops endlessly, bleeding into present reality until past and present become indistinguishable. This is what separates a Death Company dreadnought from their battle brothers, who still possess flesh and bone. A Blood Angel overcome by the Black Rage can still, theoretically, be killed by enemy fire, their suffering ended by a bolter round or a Xenos blade. But a dreadnought is armored to withstand punishment that would vaporize a dozen infantry marines. Their life support systems are redundant, shielded, designed to keep the pilot alive even when the walker itself is damaged beyond function. Death does not come easily to them, and so their madness can endure for battles beyond counting. The Blood Angels have wrestled with these twin curses since the dark days following the heresy. Entire generations of sanguinary priests have devoted their lives to seeking a cure, experimenting with gene therapy, attempting to excise the flaw from the chapter's precious gene seed stores. But 10,000 years later, the curses remain. The red thirst still drives noble warriors to savagery. The Black Rage still steals brothers on the eve of battle, transforming them into living ghosts of their Primarch's death. And when both curses fall upon a warrior already imprisoned in a dreadnought sarcophagus, when the hunger and the madness combine in a shell of adamantium and rage, what emerges is something beyond a simple war machine. It becomes a walking apocalypse, an engine of destruction driven by genetic memory and unfulfillable hunger, as likely to rampage for days after battle as during it, requiring the most skilled tech marines and the most powerful restraint systems to prevent it from destroying friend as easily as foe. This is the terrible truth of the Death Company dreadnoughts. They are not merely mad. They are cursed in ways that compound and magnify each other, trapped in forms that make their suffering eternal and their danger absolute. The moment. Everything changes. Not every Blood Angel dreadnought falls to the Black Rage. Some serve for centuries, even millennia, maintaining their sanity through sheer force of will and the careful management of their chapter's chaplains and tech marines. Ancient Astramael led 41 dreadnoughts in the defense of Baal, his consciousness clear and his purpose unwavering. There are librarian dreadnoughts who wield psychic power alongside their physical weapons, their minds sharp enough to navigate the immaterium without losing themselves. The curse is not inevitable, merely ever-present, but for those who do fall, there is often a moment, a trigger, a circumstance that tears away the veil between present and past and leaves the warrior drowning in visions they cannot escape. Sometimes it happens immediately upon awakening from internment surgery. The warrior opens their new eyes, the optical sensors of their dreadnought shell, and instead of seeing the apothecarian or the blessing ceremony, they see the vengeful spirit. Instead of hearing their chapter brothers welcoming them back to service, they hear the screams of the dying during the Siege of Terror. The trauma of losing their body, combined with the psychic vulnerability of consciousness freshly interfaced with machine systems, creates an opening through which 10,000 years of genetic memory comes flooding. This was Moriar the Chosen's fate. Brother Captain Morleo Moriar fell defending a ridge on Clamorga against Eldar raiders, his body broken, but his spirit still burning bright. His deeds had been so exceptional, his leadership so vital to the Fourth Company, that the decision to inter him was made without hesitation. He would serve the Emperor and Sanguinius as a Furioso dreadnought, his tactical genius preserved in adamantium, a living relic to guide future generations. But when the Tech Marines brought his systems online, when consciousness returned to the remnant of flesh suspended in that sacred sarcophagus, Moriar did not wake to see his brothers waiting in honor. He woke to see the traitor legions assaulting Terra's walls. He woke believing he was Sanguinius himself, rushing to defend the Eternity Gate against the forces of chaos. The Black Rage took him instantly and completely, and Morleo Moria, the captain, ceased to exist. Only Moria the Chosen remained, first of the Death Company dreadnoughts, lost to a vision he would never escape. For others, the fall comes later, sometimes centuries into their service as dreadnoughts. They wake from stasis as they have countless times before. They receive their briefing, hear about the enemy they will face, begin the mental preparations for battle. And then, without warning, the present reality tears like parchment, and the past consumes them. The triggers vary. Sometimes, it is the nature of the enemy. Facing chaos space, Marines, warriors who bear the marks of the same corruption that destroyed Horus, can cause the psychic connection to snap into place. The Dreadnought sees not the warband of some minor warlord, but the sons of Horus themselves, led by the War Master who betrayed everything. The rage that follows is absolute. Sometimes it is something in the environment, the architecture of a ship's corridors that too closely resembles the vengeful spirit, the psychic stench of warp corruption that recalls Cygnus Prime, where the Blood Angels first tasted true betrayal, the sound of a particular klaxon, or the pattern of weapons fire. Memory encoded in genetics does not require logical triggers. It can surface for reasons the conscious mind cannot comprehend. And sometimes, there is no external trigger at all. The black rage simply rises like a tide that has been held back for too long. The gene curse that every blood angel carries is not dormant, but actively suppressed, held in check by willpower and faith and the rituals of the chapter. For a dreadnought, that suppression becomes harder over centuries. The isolation, the sensory deprivation, the psychological strain of existence in the sarcophagus, all of these erode the mental barriers that keep the visions at bay. When the fall happens, it is not gradual. There is no period of increasing symptoms, no time for intervention. One moment, the dreadnought is responding to tactical queries, their ancient voice discussing disposition of forces or optimal weapon loadouts. The next moment, that voice changes, taking on a timbre of fury and sorrow that chills even battle-hardened veterans. The words change too, no longer tactical assessments, but accusations and challenges hurled at enemies 10,000 years dead. Those who witness a dreadnought's fall to the black rage describe it as watching a warrior die, even though they continue to move and speak. The personality, the accumulated wisdom of centuries, the individual who bore the name inscribed on the sarcophagus, all of it disappears, overwritten by the psychic imprint of Sanguinius's final hours. What remains is not that warrior, but an echo of their Primarch, trapped in the moment of his greatest defeat and doomed to relive it forever. The chapter's chaplains, especially those assigned to minister to the Death Company, understand this transformation better than most. They have seen it happen to brothers they have known for decades. They have watched the light of recognition fade from a dreadnought's optical sensors, replaced by the unfocused fury of madness. They know that the warrior they speak to is already gone, that the voice answering their benedictions is not their brother's, but a ghost's. And yet the chaplains continue to offer their prayers and perform their rites. Because even in madness, even lost to the black rage, these dreadnoughts are still servants of the Emperor. They are still sons of Sanguinius, carrying within them a piece of their Primarch's final sacrifice. The tragedy of their condition does not diminish the nobility of their purpose. If anything, it makes their continued service more sacred, more worthy of reverence. When a dreadnought falls to the black rage, the chapter must make decisions quickly. The walker cannot be allowed to rampage through the fortress monastery or the strike cruiser. Its weapon systems must be secured, its movement restricted until proper containment can be arranged. This requires the coordinated effort of multiple tech marines, who must approach the maddened dreadnought with sacred oils and incense, chanting the litanies of calm while simultaneously engaging mechanical lockouts and power reducers. It is dangerous work. A dreadnought in the grip of the black rage sees enemies everywhere, and the tech marines are as likely to be targeted as anyone else. More than one has been crushed by a power fist or incinerated by a heavy flamer while attempting to bring an ancient brother under control. But it is necessary work, because without intervention, the Dreadnought will simply continue its rampage until its power cells are exhausted or it destroys itself in fury. Once secured, the Dreadnought is brought before the chapter's senior leadership and its sanguinary priests. They must decide the fallen warrior's fate. Some Dreadnoughts, in the immediate aftermath of the Black Rage's onset, can still respond to commands, can still be directed toward the enemy rather than allowed to attack indiscriminately. These are inducted into the Death Company, their armor repainted in the black and red that marks them as lost, and prepared for one final service. Others are too far gone, too consumed by visions to follow even the most basic directives. For these warriors, the decision is harder. They can be placed in permanent stasis, locked away in the deepest vaults of the fortress monastery, where they can do no harm but also serve no purpose. Or they can be granted the Emperor's peace, their sarcophagi opened and their suffering ended by bolt round or blade. It is a terrible choice, one that weighs heavily on those who must make it. Every Dreadnought represents centuries of service, an irreplaceable repository of tactical knowledge and combat experience. To end such a warrior's existence feels like murder, even when it is mercy. But to preserve them in eternal madness, caged and purposeless, seems equally cruel. Most chapters choose a middle path. They preserve the Dreadnought, but prepare it for deployment with the Death Company, where its madness can be weaponized against the Imperium's enemies. It will fight one last battle, or a dozen, or 100, until finally the accumulated damage is too great, and the ancient warrior finds peace in destruction. It is not a good ending, but in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, there are no good endings, only necessary ones. Moriar, the Chosen, a legend, written in madness. If there is a single name that defines what it means to be a Death Company Dreadnought, it is Moriar the Chosen. His story has been told in chapter houses across the Blood Angel's successor chapters, a tale of glory and tragedy, so intertwined that they cannot be separated. Before his fall, Morleo Moriar was the epitome of what a Blood Angel's captain should be. He led the 4th Company with distinction, combining tactical brilliance with the martial prowess that characterized Sanguinius's sons. His men would follow him into the jaws of hell itself, not because they were ordered to, but because they believed in him absolutely. He exemplified the chapter's virtues: nobility, sacrifice, dedication to the protection of humanity. The battle on Clamorga should have been a footnote in the chapter's history, a minor engagement against a Xenos raiding force. The Eldar had struck at an Imperial settlement, their swift raiders killing and vanishing before proper defenses could be organized. The 4th Company was dispatched to drive them off and secure the planet's strategic installations. Moriar led from the front as always, his power sword gleaming as it carved through alien flesh. But the Eldar are treacherous, and this raid was more than it appeared. The ridge that Moriar and his veterans defended was a linchpin in the planet's defensive network. If it fell, the enemy could strike at the chapter's landing zones and cut off reinforcement. Moriar recognized this immediately and ordered his company to hold at any cost. They held. Through waves of Eldar assault, through the screaming jet bikes and the impossible grace of aspect warriors, the 4th Company stood firm. Moriar himself accounted for dozens of kills, his blade never stopping, his commands never wavering. He was magnificent, the perfect embodiment of everything the Blood Angels aspired to be. And then a sniper found its mark. A shuriken round, fired from concealment, slipped through the gap between his pauldron and breastplate. It severed his spinal cord and ruptured vital organs, damage so catastrophic that he collapsed instantly. His veterans formed a shield wall around their fallen captain, holding the ridge even as apothecaries rushed to his side. The prognosis was grim. Moriar's body was broken beyond any hope of conventional repair. His legs would never walk again. His arms could barely move. Internal bleeding was severe enough that even the enhanced physiology of a space marine could not compensate. Without intervention, he would die within hours. But his mind remained sharp, his spirit undimmed, and his service record was exemplary. The decision was made: he would be interred. The process was rushed, conducted in field conditions that were far from ideal. Chapter serfs worked alongside Tech Marines to prepare a Furioso Dreadnought chassis, one of the Blood Angel's most potent close combat patterns. It was painted in the crimson and gold of the chapter, adorned with honors befitting a company captain. Into its sarcophagus went what remained of Morleo Moriar, barely clinging to life, trusting in his brothers to preserve him for continued service. When the activation sequence completed and Moriar's consciousness interfaced with the Dreadnought's systems, those present expected to hear words of thanks or determination, perhaps a request for status on the battle still raging across Clamorga. What they heard instead was a roar of rage and anguish that echoed across the battlefield, a sound so primal and terrible that it froze even hardened veterans in their tracks. Moriar's first words through the Dreadnought's voxcasters were not in the present tense. He spoke of traitors assaulting terror. He demanded to know where Horus was. He called for his father, not his chapter master, but the Emperor himself. The black rage had taken him instantly, completely, with a ferocity that suggested it had been waiting for this moment, held back during his mortal life, only to surge forward the instant he was vulnerable. The Tech Marines attempted to shut down the Walker's systems, to place Moriar in stasis before he could harm himself or others. But the newly interred warrior was faster than they anticipated. One Tech Marine was sent flying by a massive fist. Another barely avoided a burst from the Blood Fist's integrated Stormbolter. The Dreadnought took 3 steps toward the ongoing battle, systems screaming damage warnings, before enough magnetic locks could be engaged to arrest its movement. It took a full day to contain Moriar's rage. Chaplains spoke the liturgies of calm. Tech Marines flooded the sarcophagus with sedatives strong enough to fell a bull grox. Finally, the ancient warrior's systems quieted, going into a forced stasis that was more shutdown than sleep. In the silence that followed, the chapter's leadership convened to discuss what should be done with their fallen brother. Some argued for immediate termination of the internment. The warrior they had known was gone, consumed by madness, and to preserve him would only prolong suffering. Others insisted that Moriar deserved a chance to serve, that perhaps in battle the focus of his rage could be directed toward the enemies of the Imperium. The debate stretched for hours, but ultimately, one voice settled the matter. The chapter's oldest chaplain, a veteran who had tended the Death Company for 3 centuries, spoke with quiet authority. Moriar's fall was tragic, he acknowledged, but it was also an opportunity. Never before had a Dreadnought succumbed to the Black Rage so completely. If they could learn to direct that fury, to channel the psychic echo of Sanguinius's death into tactical application, they might create a weapon unlike any the chapter possessed. It would be a grim experiment, but the potential value was immense. Thus was Moriar the chosen born. The name itself was carefully selected. Moriar retained the echo of his original identity, a gesture toward the warrior who had been. The chosen acknowledged both his selection for this terrible duty and the irony that he had been chosen by the curse as much as by the chapter. It was a name that honored and mourned simultaneously. His Dreadnought chassis was repainted in the black of the Death Company, the red saltires stark against the dark ceramite. But Moriar posed a unique challenge that other Death Company members did not. The red thirst, already strong in him during life, had become overwhelming in his Dreadnought form. The hunger for blood consumed him, and unlike Infantry Death Company, who could occasionally feed their curse in battle, Moriar had no mouth, no hands to tear and rend. The solution the Tech Marines devised remains a closely guarded secret, known only to the chapter's most senior artificers. they modified his sarcophagus to include what could only be described as a feeding mechanism, a system that could introduce blood directly into the amniotic tank. Where this blood came from varied. Sometimes it was from the chapter's own wounded, their vitae given freely to sustain a fallen brother. Sometimes it was extracted from fallen enemies, their tainted blood filtered and sanctified before use. The specifics mattered less than the result. Moria could, at least partially, satisfy the Red Thirst's demands. This modification allowed Moria to function in ways that would otherwise have been impossible. While he was still lost to the Black Rage, still believing himself to be sanguinius fighting an eternal war against Horus and the traitor legions, he could be directed by chaplains who understood how to frame commands in terms his maddened consciousness could comprehend. When told that Horus's forces were advancing on a particular position, Moria would move to engage without hesitation. When shown targets marked as traitors, he would annihilate them with terrifying efficiency. His first true deployment came mere weeks after his fall, when a Chaos warband struck at an Imperial shrine world the Blood Angels had sworn to protect. The chapter mustered rapidly, and among the forces committed was their newly created Death Company Dreadnought. Moria was loaded into a drop pod alongside Death Company Marines, warriors who shared his curse if not his armored form, and together they were hurled toward the planet's surface. The moment the drop pod's doors blew open, Moria charged into the enemy with a fury that defied description. His blood fists pulverized traitor Marines with each strike. His Stormbolter and Melter Gun turned entire squads into scattered atoms. He moved with speed that seemed impossible for something so massive, the Dreadnought frame serving as a perfect vessel for the rage that consumed him. Where he struck, the enemy broke. Where he advanced, resistance crumbled. Battle brothers fighting alongside him reported that Moria's voxcasters screamed constantly during the engagement, a mixture of challenges to Horus, prayers to the Emperor, and wordless roars of fury. He did not distinguish between tactical targets. He simply destroyed everything in his path that bore the marks of chaos, treating each traitor as if they were personally responsible for his Primarch's death. In the span of 3 hours, Moria accounted for over 200 enemy kills, and that was a conservative estimate from the apothecaries who examined the aftermath. But when the battle ended, when the Chaos forces were driven back and the Shrine world secured, Moria did not stand down. He continued to rampage across the battlefield, attacking rubble that his rage-addled consciousness interpreted as enemies. He had to be corralled by multiple tech marines using shock mauls and neural dampeners, a process that took another full day and resulted in significant damage to his chassis. This became the pattern of Moria's existence. In battle, he was unstoppable, a force of nature that could turn the tide of engagements that would otherwise have ended in defeat. His presence alone was worth an entire squad of Terminators, his fury adding a dimension to the Death Company's assaults that made them exponentially more dangerous. But after each battle, there was the rampage to contain, the slow and dangerous process of bringing him to a state where he could be placed in stasis. The Blood Angels' armorers created special restraint systems, massive clamps and power reducers that could be deployed in the field. Chaplains developed specific liturgies, prayers that invoked Sanguinius's name in ways that could penetrate even the deepest madness. Over time, they learned the patterns of Moria's rage, the signals that indicated when the ancient warrior was beginning to wind down from battle fury, and they used this knowledge to minimize the danger during the containment process. Reports from campaigns featuring Moria the Chosen became legendary within the chapter and its successors. There was the relief of Hive Tertius, where his assault broke a 3-month siege by obliterating the enemy's command structure in a single devastating charge. There was the cleansing of Space Hulk Perdition's crown, where Moria led Death Company Marines through corridors so cramped that normal dreadnoughts could not deploy, his fury so absolute that even Genestealers fled before him. There was the defense of the Cryptus system against Hive Fleet Leviathan, where Moria fought alongside two other Death Company dreadnoughts, Metaphase and Perjurius, turning the tide of battle through sheer, unstoppable violence. Each victory added to the legend, but each also added to the tragedy. Because no matter how many enemies fell before Moria's fists, no matter how many battles he won for the chapter, he remained lost. The warrior who had been Morleo Moria was gone, consumed utterly by the psychic echo of his Primarch's death. What fought in his place was a ghost, a fury given form, a weapon of unparalleled lethality that would never know peace until its ultimate destruction. And that destruction, the chapter knew, was not a question of if, but when. Each battle stressed Moria's systems. Each rampage damaged components that could not be easily replaced. The Dreadnought chassis was ancient technology, its construction methods lost to the degradation of knowledge that characterized the Imperium. Parts could be scavenged or fabricated, but perfection could not be guaranteed. Eventually, inevitably, Moria would suffer damage too severe to repair, and the chapter would lose not just a weapon, but the last remnant of a hero who had deserved better. This knowledge haunts every engagement featuring Moria the Chosen. His fellow Blood Angels honor him, pray for him, hope that his death in battle will be clean and glorious. But they also fear him, because madness armored in adamantium is a terrifying thing, even when aimed at the Imperium's enemies. They fear what he has become, and they fear that any of them might share his fate, that one day they too might fall to the Black Rage and be imprisoned in their own Dreadnought sarcophagus, doomed to fight an eternal war against ghosts. The experience of battle through madness. To comprehend what battle is like for a Death Company, Dreadnought requires understanding that they do not perceive reality the way others do. Their consciousness exists in a state of temporal collapse, where past and present occupy the same space, where every enemy is simultaneously who they actually are and who the Black Rage makes them appear to be. When Moria the Chosen, or any Death Company dreadnought, deploys for battle, they are not experiencing the current conflict. They are experiencing the siege of Terra, the final desperate hours of the Horus heresy. The battlefield around them is Terra's surface, scarred by orbital bombardment and trampled by traitor titans. The fortifications they assault are the Eternity Gate itself, the final barrier between the Emperor and annihilation. The enemies they face are not orcs or tyrannids or chaos cultists, but the sons of Horus, the World Eaters, the Emperor's children, all the traitor legions that threw in their lot with the War Master. This is not metaphor or approximation. To a consciousness trapped in the Black Rage, these visions are absolute reality. An orc war boss becomes Horus himself, the arch-traitor in his Terminator plate, towering and terrible. Smaller orcs become traitor space marines, their crude weapons transformed in perception into bolters and chain axes. The green tide becomes a crimson one, blood and corruption flooding across Terra's sacred ground. The Death Company dreadnought does not question these visions. The Black Rage strips away critical thinking, replacing it with a single overwhelming imperative: fight, defend Terra, protect the Emperor, stop Horus. The simplicity is part of what makes Death Company so dangerous in combat. They do not calculate firing solutions or consider tactical implications. They identify enemies and destroy them with every weapon at their disposal, holding nothing back, accepting no possibility except total annihilation of everything they perceive as a threat. For a dreadnought, this translates to combat of the most savage kind. Their weapon systems, already devastating when used with tactical precision, become instruments of apocalyptic violence when wielded without restraint. Blood fists, designed for puncturing armor, are used to pulverize everything in reach, striking with such force that they liquefy bodies and crack foundation stones. Storm bolters that should fire in controlled bursts instead roar continuously until their ammunition hoppers run dry. Melter guns designed for surgical strikes against armor become indiscriminate incinerators, sweeping across entire formations. The Dreadnought's machine spirit, the artificial intelligence that helps coordinate the walker's systems, attempts to regulate this violence, to prevent the weapon from destroying itself through reckless operation. But the Black Rage overrides these safeguards. The warrior's consciousness, interfaced so completely with the machine, forces the systems to comply even when doing so risks catastrophic failure. Targeting servitors burn out from the pace of acquisition requests. Weapons overheat and must be vented mid-combat. The Dreadnought's own structure groans under stresses it was never designed to withstand. But none of this registers as danger to the Death Company Dreadnought. Pain, in the conventional sense, does not exist for them. Damage warnings are noise to be ignored. The only thing that matters is the enemy before them, the enemy that must be destroyed, because that enemy is Horus, or a servant of Horus, and Horus must not be allowed to reach the Emperor. This singular focus makes them extraordinarily effective in their designated role, but it also makes them profoundly vulnerable in ways that tactical dreadnoughts are not. A standard dreadnought pilot, maintaining full consciousness and tactical awareness, will withdraw when damaged, seeking cover and support. They understand the value of their chassis and will not risk its destruction unnecessarily. But a Death Company Dreadnought has no such restraint. If withdrawing means allowing the enemy to advance, they will stand and fight until destroyed. If protecting an objective means absorbing fire that should be avoided, they do so without hesitation. Their courage is absolute because fear has been burned away by madness, replaced with the genetic memory of Sanguinius's own fearlessness in the face of doom. This makes them invaluable for certain types of engagements. When a fortress must be breached regardless of cost, when a corridor must be held against impossible odds, when an enemy commander must be killed even if it means crossing a kill zone that would obliterate a normal assault force, Death Company Dreadnoughts excel. They can absorb punishment that would stop even Terminators, their armored shells serving as mobile fortifications behind which other Death Company can advance. They create chaos in enemy lines simply by existing, because any force that sees a dreadnought charging them with absolute disregard for its own survival tends to break formation, trying to stop it. But this effectiveness comes at a cost, measured in more than ammunition and structural integrity. Each battle adds to the Death Company Dreadnought's accumulated psychological damage, layering new traumatic stimuli onto the already overwhelming experience of the Black Rage. The warrior trapped in the sarcophagus relives not just Sanguinius's death, but their own deaths, the countless times they have been damaged, disabled, nearly destroyed. These experiences merge with the Primarch's final moments, creating a recursive nightmare where death and battle become inseparable concepts. Some Death Company Dreadnoughts develop what chaplains call death-seeking behavior, though this term is somewhat misleading. They do not seek death in the conventional sense of wanting to end their existence. Rather, they seek the completion of their purpose, as they understand it through the lens of the Black Rage. They seek the moment when they finally defeat Horus, when the traitor falls and the Emperor is saved, when the heresy ends and peace returns. But that moment never comes. No matter how many enemies they destroy, Horus remains standing in their visions. No matter how many battles they win, the siege of terror continues. The psychic loop is perfect and inescapable. Victory in the present does not translate to resolution in the past, because the past they fight in is not real, cannot be changed, exists only as genetic memory, endlessly cycling. This creates behaviors that battlefield observers find disturbing, even by Death Company standards. A dreadnought will sometimes attack fallen enemies repeatedly, as if unable to comprehend that they are already dead, because in their vision, Horus continues to rise, no matter how many times he is struck down. They will pursue specific targets with single-minded focus, ignoring more dangerous threats, because that particular orc or tyrannid triggered a resonance in the Black Rage that identified it as especially significant. They will speak to the air, responding to conversations only they can hear, interrogating their Primarch's shade, or pleading with phantoms of long-dead brothers. The Death Company infantry who fight alongside these dreadnoughts understand, to a degree, what their armored brothers experience. They too are lost to the Black Rage, seeing the heresy where others see the present. But there is a crucial difference. The infantry can, occasionally, be killed by conventional fire. A bolter round to the head, a power sword through the chest, and their suffering ends. For the Dreadnought, protected by ceramite inches thick and systems designed to preserve life at all costs, death is much harder to achieve. This creates the paradox that defines Death Company Dreadnought existence. They are simultaneously the most protected and the most vulnerable warriors on the battlefield. Protected from physical harm by their adamantium shells, vulnerable to endless psychological torment because those same shells prevent them from finding peace in death. Chaplains who minister to the Death Company attempt to provide spiritual comfort, even to warriors so far gone that they cannot recognize their own chapter brothers. They speak the liturgies of the lost, prayers that acknowledge the sacrifice these warriors have made and the suffering they endure. They remind the dreadnoughts that their service, though terrible, is sacred, that every enemy they destroy is one fewer threat to the Imperium, and to the Emperor they believe they are still defending. Whether any of this penetrates the madness is unknown. Death Company dreadnoughts rarely respond to spiritual comfort. Their voxcasters transmit only rage and ancient names, demands for information about traitor movements, accusations leveled at enemies 10,000 years dead. But the chaplains continue their ministry regardless, because faith demands it, and because the alternative, accepting that these warriors are truly lost, beyond all comfort and hope, is too bitter to contemplate. After the battle, rampage and restraint. The moment of victory is, paradoxically, one of the most dangerous phases of any battle involving Death Company dreadnoughts. When the enemy is defeated, when the objective is secured, when conventional forces would withdraw to regroup and resupply, Death Company dreadnoughts continue to fight. Because in their vision, the battle is never over. The Siege of Terror does not end with a single victory. Horus is not defeated. The war continues, and so they continue. This creates the phenomenon that chapter records refer to as post-battle rampage, though the term fails to capture the full complexity of what occurs. The dreadnought does not simply attack randomly. Rather, it continues to engage what its consciousness identifies as enemy forces, even when those forces no longer exist in objective reality. It pursues targets that are not there. It destroys fortifications that have already fallen. It fights ghosts projected by the Black Rage onto a battlefield already silent with the Imperium's victory. The physical danger this poses cannot be overstated. A dreadnought in this state is indiscriminate in its application of force. Battle brothers who moments before fought beside the ancient warrior now become potential targets if they move wrong, speak wrong, present themselves in ways that the dreadnought's maddened consciousness interprets as hostile. The very unpredictability makes approach nearly impossible because there are no reliable patterns, no safe angles of advance. Tech Marines train extensively for this eventuality, developing protocols specifically for containing rampaging dreadnoughts. The process begins with assessment from a safe distance, using Auspex scans to determine the walker's current status, power levels, weapon heat, structural integrity. All of these factors influence the approach strategy. A dreadnought with depleted ammunition and low power reserves can be contained through different methods than one still carrying a full weapons loadout. The ideal containment involves a coordinated approach from multiple angles, with Tech Marines carrying specialized equipment designed to interface with and override dreadnought systems. Electromagnetic pulse generators can temporarily disrupt the neural interfaces, creating windows of confusion during which physical restraints can be applied. Adamantium chains, blessed by chaplains and inscribed with prayers, can be secured to the Dreadnought's limbs, restricting movement without causing permanent damage. But these ideal situations are rare. More often, containment happens under field conditions with limited resources and no time for proper preparation. The Dreadnought must be stopped before it wanders into civilian populations or friendly fortifications. This necessitates more aggressive interventions, techniques that risk damaging both the Dreadnought and those attempting the containment. Combat servitors, mindless cyborgs incapable of fear, are sometimes used as initial deterrents. They swarm the Dreadnought, grappling its limbs and weighing it down through sheer mass. The Death Company Dreadnought destroys them, of course, tearing servitors apart with mechanical efficiency, but each one destroyed is a few more seconds bought for tech marines to move into position. The calculations are grim but necessary. Better to sacrifice a dozen servitors than risk the Dreadnought killing battle brothers or destroying irreplaceable equipment. When possible, specialized containment vehicles are deployed. These are armored transports modified with heavy-duty magnetic clamps, grav plates, and power dampeners. They approach the Dreadnought from multiple vectors, coordinating their movements through machine cant that the rampaging walker cannot intercept. If they can get close enough, the magnetic clamps engage, locking onto the Dreadnought's legs and chassis, while grav plates activate to increase the walker's effective weight manyfold. Even a Dreadnought's servo motors struggle against such resistance, and combined with power dampeners that drain the walker's energy reserves, they can achieve immobilization. But every step of this process is dangerous, and casualties are not uncommon. Moria the Chosen alone has injured or killed over 24 tech marines and servitors during post-battle containment across his centuries of service. Other Death Company Dreadnoughts have similar or higher tallies. The chapter accepts these losses as the price of maintaining these warriors, but that acceptance does not make the deaths any less tragic. The duration of post-battle rampage varies significantly between different Dreadnoughts and different battles. Sometimes it lasts only hours, with the warrior's fury burning itself out as power reserves deplete. Other times it can extend for days, the Dreadnought somehow finding reserves of energy that diagnostic equipment insisted did not exist, pushing systems far beyond their rated tolerances through sheer force of will, channeled through madness. The longest recorded rampage involved a Death Company Dreadnought of the Flesh Tearers chapter, which continued its assault for 9 days following a battle against Orc invaders. It carved a path through kilometers of wilderness, attacking everything it encountered: trees, rocks, abandoned structures, as if each were a mortal enemy. By the time tech marines finally managed to shut it down, the Dreadnought had traveled over 50 kilometers from the original battle site and expended energy equivalent to a month of normal operations. How it survived that long remains a mystery, though some theorize that the Black Rage itself somehow interfaces with the Dreadnought's machine spirit in ways that transcend normal mechanical limitations. Once a Death Company Dreadnought has been successfully contained and brought to a powered-down state, the chapter's leadership must make another decision: what to do with the warrior for the next battle. Some Dreadnoughts, despite their madness, retain enough awareness to be safely stored and redeployed. Others have degraded so far that continued service seems more cruel than practical. The sanguinary priests examine the warrior, though their work with Dreadnoughts is limited compared to their expertise with flesh and blood. They assess the level of the Black Rage's hold, looking for any signs that lucidity might return or that the madness might be manageable. They consult with chaplains who have interacted with the Dreadnought during battle, gathering impressions about whether the ancient warrior can still respond to directives framed appropriately. These assessments are imperfect at best. The Black Rage is not a stable condition. A Dreadnought that seems responsive one day might be utterly lost the next. Conversely, one that appeared beyond all reach might suddenly demonstrate awareness that suggests some fragment of the original personality endures. The genetic curse is as unpredictable in its progression as in its onset. If the decision is made to preserve the Dreadnought for continued service, it is secured in specialized containment within the chapter's fortress monastery or battle barge. These facilities are reinforced far beyond normal armory standards, designed to hold even a fully active Dreadnought should its stasis fail. Magnetic restraints hold the walker in place. Power feeds maintain minimal life support without providing enough energy for movement. Monitoring systems track every fluctuation in the sarcophagus's conditions, alerting tech marines immediately if anything approaches dangerous parameters. Even in this dormant state, Death Company dreadnoughts are never truly at rest. Their consciousness, trapped in the eternal loop of the Black Rage, continues to experience the vision of Sanguinius's death. They dream, if such a word can apply to machine-augmented consciousness, of the heresy. They fight phantom battles in the darkness of stasis. The neural interfaces that connect them to their dreadnought shells carry constant low-level activity, as if the warrior within is always trying to move, always attempting to engage enemies that exist only in genetic memory. Tech Marines who maintain Death Company dreadnoughts report that this activity creates unusual strain on systems that should be idle. Servos twitch. Weapons systems attempt to activate and are blocked by safety protocols. The machine spirits of these dreadnoughts, normally quiescent during stasis, exhibit behaviors that suggest agitation or distress. Whether this represents the machine spirit responding to its pilot's madness or something else entirely remains a subject of theological debate among the chapter's priesthood. The time between battles for a Death Company dreadnought can vary dramatically. Some are deployed frequently, their particular blend of fury and durability making them valuable assets for multiple campaigns in rapid succession. Others are held in reserve for years or even decades, awakened only when the chapter faces threats severe enough to justify the risk of deploying them. This irregular cycle of use creates its own problems. Extended periods in stasis can cause degradation of the neural interfaces, making the dreadnought's connection to its systems less stable when finally reactivated. Components that go unused for years may fail when suddenly called upon. Most concerning, there is evidence that the Black Rage itself intensifies during prolonged stasis, as if the isolation and sensory deprivation amplify the psychic echo that drives the madness. When the decision comes to awaken a Death Company dreadnought for another deployment, the process is treated with all the ceremony due to such a terrible moment. Chaplains gather to speak prayers over the dormant walker. Tech Marines perform the activation rituals with exacting care, knowing that any mistake could result in immediate catastrophe. The chapter's leadership watches, ready to give the order to shut the dreadnought down again if it proves uncontrollable. And then power flows back into the systems. The amniotic tank's fluids begin to circulate. Neural interfaces re-establish their connections. Consciousness returns to the warrior entombed within, and with it comes the Black Rage, as overwhelming as the moment it first struck. The dreadnought's optical sensors light with fury. Its voxcasters begin to roar challenges to traitors long dead. Its weapons systems cycle to active status, ready for war. The cycle begins again. Another battle, another rampage, another containment. And through it all, the question that no one can answer: does the warrior within still exist somewhere beneath the madness, aware of what has become of them, suffering in ways that transcend even the physical horror of their condition? Or has the original consciousness truly been obliterated, leaving only the echo of Sanguinius's rage piloting a shell that bears a name no longer meaningful? The chapter has no answers. It can only continue to deploy these warriors, honor their sacrifice, and pray that in their madness they find some measure of the peace that has been denied them in all other forms. The inner experience, consciousness in chaos. To speak of what a Death Company dreadnought experiences internally requires speculation, as none have emerged from the Black Rage to describe it. But extrapolation from what is known about both dreadnought consciousness and the nature of the genetic curse can paint a picture, incomplete but telling. Begin with darkness. The amniotic tank is lightless, the fluid that sustains the remnant of flesh, neither warm nor cold, but simply present. There is no up or down, no sense of weight or position. The body, what remains of it, floats in this nowhere space, connected to awareness only through the constant hum of life support systems and the neural interfaces threaded through brain tissue. For a standard Dreadnought, sensory input comes through the walker's systems. Optical sensors provide vision, audio receptors deliver sound, pressure sensors transmit touch. But for a Death Company Dreadnought consumed by the Black Rage, this input is filtered through and mixed with the psychic vision that dominates their consciousness. They see through both their Dreadnought's sensors and through Sanguinius's eyes simultaneously, two realities layered impossibly together. Imagine trying to navigate when every surface is overlaid with another. You see the battlefield before you, but also the vengeful spirit's corridors. You see the enemy, orcs or tyrannids or cultists, but also traitor marines in the colors of the War Master's Legion. You see your battle brothers, and sometimes you recognize them, but other times they become figures from the heresy, brothers lost 10,000 years ago who somehow stand before you again. The temporal confusion is absolute. Cause and effect lose meaning when past and present occupy the same space. You fire your weapons, and simultaneously you are striking at Horus with your Primarch's sword. You take damage, and simultaneously you feel the War Master's claws tearing through angelic flesh. Time becomes a Mobius strip, feeding back on itself, creating loops within loops, where beginnings and endings are indistinguishable. Speech becomes nonsensical to outside observers, because it represents an attempt to communicate across this temporal divide. When a Death Company Dreadnought's voxcasters roar, "Horus, face me!" it is not that they mistake the current enemy for the arch-traitor. Rather, they are addressing the Horus of their vision, while simultaneously engaging the actual threat, unable to separate the two experiences into coherent streams. Emotions exist in this state but are amplified to levels that would shatter normal consciousness. Rage, obviously, the overwhelming fury that gives the Black Rage its name, but also sorrow at the betrayal, love for the Emperor and the Imperium that is being lost, hatred for the corruption that has claimed brothers who should have remained loyal. These feelings are not the warrior's own, not exactly, but genetic echoes of what Sanguinius felt in his final moments. They are borrowed emotions, experienced with an intensity that makes them indistinguishable from personal feeling. And underneath all of this, possibly, is the original consciousness, the warrior who was, the personality that bore the name now inscribed on the Dreadnought's hull. Whether this original self persists is the great unknown. Some theological texts from the Blood Angels Librarius suggest that the Black Rage does not destroy the personality, but rather buries it beneath the psychic weight of Sanguinius's death. The self remains, but becomes inaccessible, trapped beneath layers of genetic memory, like an archaeological artifact beneath millennia of accumulated sediment. If this is true, then the Death Company Dreadnought's experience becomes even more horrific. The warrior within is aware of what has happened to them, knows they are trapped in both the sarcophagus and the vision, but cannot communicate this knowledge or act upon it. They watch through Sanguinius's eyes as their own hands destroy enemies they do not truly see. They hear their own voice speaking words they do not choose. They are passengers in their own existence, helpless witnesses to their own madness. Some evidence supports this interpretation. There are rare, fleeting moments when Death Company Dreadnoughts exhibit behavior that suggests brief returns to clarity. A Death Company Dreadnought might suddenly pause in mid-battle, its voxcasters falling silent, its weapons lowering. For a handful of seconds, it stands motionless, as if the warrior within has pushed through the madness to reassert some measure of control. Then the moment passes, the Black Rage surges back, and the rampage continues. But those seconds, those brief islands of lucidity in an ocean of madness, suggest that something of the original person endures. chaplains report similar phenomena during their ministrations to dormant Death Company dreadnoughts. Occasionally, when reciting the liturgies of the lost or speaking the names of fallen brothers, a dreadnought's systems will react in ways that seem responsive rather than random. A slight adjustment of position, a single word transmitted through voxcasters that is contextually appropriate rather than part of the usual tirade against traitors. These moments are treasured by those who witness them, taken as evidence that their brothers are not entirely gone, that some fragment of the warriors they knew persists beneath the curse. But even if this interpretation is correct, it offers no comfort. To be aware of one's own madness, but unable to escape it. To watch yourself commit acts of violence without being able to stop or even understand them fully. To exist in a state of perpetual confusion, where reality itself is unreliable. This may be worse than simple oblivion. At least in oblivion, there is no suffering. Awareness of madness is its own unique torment. There is also the question of pain. Dreadnoughts are said to experience damage through warning systems and status reports rather than physical sensation. But Death Company dreadnoughts react to injury in ways that suggest something more visceral. They roar when struck. They focus their fury on enemies that have damaged them. Their behavior patterns indicate that they perceive harm in ways beyond mere data. Perhaps this is because the Black Rage connects them to Sanguinius's own pain, making them feel through genetic memory the agony of their Primarch's wounds. Every hit they take resonates with the memory of Horus's claws tearing through perfect flesh. Every breach of their armor recalls the breaking of angelic wings. They are experiencing their own damage and their Primarch's death simultaneously. Pain layered upon pain in a feedback loop that would drive anyone mad, even if they were not already lost to the curse. The hunger of the Red Thirst adds another dimension to this inner experience. For warriors who possess mouths and hands, the thirst can at least be understood as a desire that might be fulfilled, however temporarily. But for a dreadnought, the hunger exists without any clear object. There is craving without the ability to satisfy, desire without means of fulfillment. The modification made to Moriar's sarcophagus suggests that this hunger can reach levels that threaten the warrior's sanity, even beyond what the Black Rage inflicts. Imagine being perpetually, ravenously hungry, but having no mouth. You are suspended in fluid, motionless, with only the vague awareness that consuming something would ease the ache. But what to consume? How to consume? The concepts become abstract, the needs separated from any practical means of addressing it. This creates a background state of frustration and discomfort that never resolves, adding to the already overwhelming burden of the Black Rage. Some Death Company dreadnoughts develop obsessive behaviors that may relate to this unfulfilled hunger. They attack enemies with particular savagery, as if trying to destroy them thoroughly enough to somehow satisfy the thirst through obliteration even without consumption. They linger over fallen foes, their weapon systems continuing to fire long after the target is paced. Observers interpret this as simple rage, but it might also represent the dreadnought's unconscious attempt to feed a hunger that cannot be fed. And through all of this, the temporal confusion, the overwhelming emotions, the pain both remembered and current, the unfulfillable hunger, runs a thread of purpose. Because even lost to the Black Rage, even experiencing their existence as an incomprehensible hell of overlapping realities and ancient trauma, Death Company dreadnoughts fight. They engage the enemy. They protect their battle brothers, at least in the sense of destroying anything that threatens them. They fulfill their purpose as weapons of war, even if they can no longer fully comprehend what that purpose is. This might be the cruelest aspect of all. The warrior's dedication, the core commitment to duty that made them worthy of internment in the first place, persists even when everything else about them has been consumed by madness. They continue to serve the Emperor and Sanguinius, not because they understand why or even fully grasp who they are fighting for, but because something fundamental in their psyche will not allow them to stop. Duty has become reflexive, inscribed so deeply that not even the Black Rage can erase it. Whether this represents hope or simply another layer of tragedy, is a question Blood Angels philosophers have debated for millennia. Is it noble that these warriors continue to fight despite their affliction? Or is it simply cruel that they cannot find rest even in madness, that their very virtue has become another prison? There are no good answers. There is only the reality. Somewhere within each death company, Dreadnought exists or existed, a consciousness experiencing things no being should have to endure, fighting battles on multiple temporal and psychological fronts simultaneously, trapped in a form that was supposed to honor them, but has instead become another manifestation of the curse that plagues all who carry Sanguinius's blood. Brotherhood in isolation. The relationship between Death Company Dreadnoughts and other elements of their chapter is complex, marked by reverence, fear, and profound sadness. These warriors are simultaneously honored as heroes and mourned as lost, treated with the respect due to ancient veterans, while also being regarded as dangers that must be carefully managed. For the Death Company infantry who fight alongside these dreadnoughts, there is a strange kinship. They too are lost to the Black Rage, experiencing the same temporal confusion and consuming visions. When they charge into battle beside a Death Company dreadnought, they are united in madness, all seeing the same ancient war, all fighting the same ancient enemies. There is communication of a sort between them, not in the conventional sense of tactical coordination, but in the shared understanding that comes from experiencing identical delusions. Battle brothers who have survived service in the Death Company on rare occasions, those few who somehow pushed through the Black Rage or were judged worthy of the Emperor's peace before succumbing fully, report that the presence of a Death Company dreadnought in combat felt almost comforting. The massive walker became a focal point for the fury they all felt, a physical manifestation of Sanguinius's rage that they could rally around. When the dreadnought charged, they charged with it. When it roared challenge to Horus, they added their voices to the cry. The madness was shared, and in that sharing, there was a twisted form of brotherhood. But this connection exists only in battle. In the aftermath, when the Death Company dreadnought rampages and the infantry must be restrained or killed, that kinship dissolves. The dreadnought becomes an object of pity or terror, depending on one's proximity to its fury. The infantry, if they survive their own combat and the Emperor's peace is not administered, are locked away in the Tower of Amareo until death claims them. But the dreadnought, too durable to kill easily and too valuable to waste, continues its cycle of stasis and deployment. For chaplains assigned to the Death Company, the dreadnoughts represent both the greatest challenge and the deepest sorrow of their ministry. These spiritual warriors are trained to guide the lost, to provide what comfort they can to brothers who have fallen to the curse. With infantry, this is difficult but achievable. They can speak prayers directly to the afflicted, can sometimes reach through the madness to the consciousness beneath, can offer the benediction of the Emperor's peace when appropriate. With dreadnoughts, the distance is greater. The warrior within is sealed behind adamantium, accessible only through vox systems that transmit their madness, but rarely anything else. Chaplains must speak their prayers to a machine that seems barely to acknowledge their presence, offering spiritual comfort to a consciousness that may no longer be capable of receiving it. Yet they persist, because faith demands it, and because abandoning these warriors to their madness without even attempting ministry seems a betrayal worse than the curse itself. Some chaplains specialize in Death Company dreadnought ministry, developing techniques and liturgies specific to these warriors. They learn the patterns of each dreadnought's madness, the particular forms their visions take, the names they cry out, and the enemies they perceive. Armed with this knowledge, they can sometimes frame their prayers in ways that penetrate the Black Rage, speaking of terror's defense or the Emperor's safety in terms that resonate with the warrior's delusions. There are accounts of chaplains achieving temporary communication with Death Company dreadnoughts through this method. The ancient warriors' voxcasters, usually spewing only rage and ancient names, might respond to a specific prayer with something approaching coherence. A question about the emperor's safety might receive an answer that suggests the warrior within still processes current information, even if only through the filter of their madness. These moments are rare and fleeting, but they are treasured as evidence that the brothers they have lost are not entirely beyond reach. The relationship between Death Company dreadnoughts and the chapter's tech marines is necessarily more practical, but no less complex. These skilled artificers are responsible for maintaining the ancient walkers, performing repairs after battle, managing the delicate systems that keep the pilots alive. They approach this work with a mixture of reverence for the technology and sorrow for the warrior trapped within it. Tech Marines speak the litanies of maintenance while working on Death Company dreadnoughts, prayers to the Omnissiah asking for the machine spirit's cooperation and blessing. But they also speak informally to the warriors themselves, narrating their work as if the pilot could hear and understand. "Brother, I am repairing your left servo arm. You struck it against a wall during your last containment, but the damage is minor. You will be whole again for the next battle." Whether this communication serves any purpose beyond comforting the Tech Marine himself is unknown, but it reflects the unwillingness to treat these warriors as mere machines. The technical challenges of maintaining Death Company dreadnoughts exceed those of standard walkers. The rampages damage systems in unpredictable ways. The intensity of combat use stresses components beyond their design parameters. The amniotic tanks require constant monitoring and adjustment, as the red thirst and black rage create chemical imbalances that standard filtration cannot fully address. Tech Marines assigned to Death Company dreadnoughts become specialists in improvisation, learning to repair damage that shouldn't be repairable, and maintain systems under conditions that would make conventional maintenance impossible. There is also an emotional toll. Every Tech Marine who works on these walkers knows they are preserving warriors in a state worse than death, enabling their continued suffering in service to the chapter. The question of whether this is right, whether mercy would be better than maintenance, haunts many of them. But they continue their work because duty demands it, and because the warriors themselves would want to continue serving if they could express such a preference. For the chapter's broader brotherhood, the tactical Marines, assault Marines, devastators, all those who have not fallen to the curse, Death Company dreadnoughts exist in a strange, liminal space. They are heroes, their names spoken with honor in chapter ceremonies, their deeds recorded in the Book of Martyrs alongside the chapter's most revered warriors. But they are also warnings, living examples of the curse that threatens every blood angel, reminders of how quickly honor can become horror. Young blood angels are taught the names and histories of Death Company dreadnoughts as part of their spiritual education. They learn about Moriar the Chosen's tactical brilliance before his fall. They hear accounts of the battles these ancient warriors have won, but they also learn about the rampage containments, the centuries of madness, the price these brothers have paid for their continued service. The lessons are complex, designed to instill both respect for the sacrifice and wariness of the curse. Some blood angels find the existence of Death Company dreadnoughts comforting in a strange way. If even madness and mechanical imprisonment cannot stop a warrior from serving the Emperor, then there is hope that they too might continue to serve regardless of what befalls them. The curse loses some of its terror when seen through this lens, becoming not an ending, but a transformation into a different mode of service. Others find them profoundly disturbing, reminders that there are fates worse than death, and that the chapter inflicts these fates on its own members in the name of duty. These blood angels question, privately and with great guilt, whether the Death Company dreadnoughts should be maintained at all, whether the Emperor's peace might be the greater honor. Such thoughts are never spoken openly, as they verge on heresy, but they persist nonetheless. The Death Company dreadnoughts themselves, locked in their madness, are likely unaware of any of these attitudes. They do not know they are revered or feared, honored or pitied. They exist in their visions, fighting eternal wars against traitors who died millennia ago, experiencing a reality that has little to do with how they are perceived by those around them. The isolation is absolute, not because they are physically separated, but because the Black Rage has placed them beyond the reach of normal communication or understanding. And yet, in rare moments, there are hints of connection. A Dreadnought might pause when hearing its true name spoken, as if some fragment of the original personality recognizes itself. Another might direct its fury specifically to protect nearby battle brothers, suggesting awareness of their presence even through the madness. These glimpses of the warriors they were give hope that brotherhood, in some fundamental form, persists even when everything else has been consumed by the curse. Hope and despair, the question of resolution. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, hope is a rare commodity, hoarded and protected like the precious resource it is. For Death Company dreadnoughts and those who care for them, hope takes strange forms, often indistinguishable from despair. There is hope in battle, the belief that perhaps this deployment will be the one where the dreadnought finds the peace of final destruction. A clean kill, weapons fire penetrating the sarcophagus, ending centuries of madness in an instant of merciful oblivion. Chaplains pray for this outcome, while simultaneously praying for the dreadnought's survival, the contradiction reflecting the impossible position the curse has created. There is hope in the rare moments of seeming lucidity, the brief pauses when a Death Company dreadnought appears to emerge from madness, even if only for seconds. These moments are recorded meticulously in chapter archives, analyzed by sanguinary priests and librarians seeking patterns, searching for any indication that the Black Rage might diminish or that consciousness might be recoverable. So far, no pattern has emerged, but the search continues because the alternative, accepting that these warriors are permanently lost, is too painful. There is hope, strangely enough, in the coming of the Primaris Marines. When Archmagos Belisarius Cawl arrived at Baal with his reinforcements of new generation Space Marines, created from enhanced gene seed and superior processes, many believed that perhaps the curse would not affect them. Perhaps Cawl's improvements had eliminated the genetic flaw. Perhaps the Primaris would be immune to the Black Rage and Red Thirst. This hope was short-lived. Primaris Marines have fallen to the Black Rage just as their firstborn brothers do. The curse is written too deeply into Sanguinius's bloodline to be removed by even the most advanced genetic engineering. Primaris Death Company now exist, and inevitably, Primaris Death Company dreadnoughts will join their firstborn counterparts in the terrible fellowship of eternal madness. But even this disappointment carries a twisted form of hope. If the curse cannot be removed, perhaps it can be understood better. The Primaris gene seed, being newer and more completely documented than the ancient lineages, might provide insights into the mechanism of the Black Rage. Sanguinary priests study Primaris who have fallen, comparing their symptoms and progression to those of firstborn brothers, looking for any difference that might suggest a path toward treatment, if not cure. Chief Librarian Mephiston represents another form of hope, though one so extraordinary that it offers little practical comfort. Mephiston is unique among all Blood Angels for having overcome the Black Rage through sheer force of will and psychic power. Once Brother Calistarius, he fell to the curse during the Second War for Armageddon, experiencing the full horror of the genetic vision. But somehow, trapped in rubble for 7 days and nights, he fought his way back to consciousness, emerging transformed into something more than he had been. Mephiston's existence proves that the Black Rage is not absolutely inescapable, but his is the only confirmed case of recovery in 10,000 years. The odds are so astronomically against another Blood Angel achieving what he did that his example provides more frustration than encouragement. It is like telling someone dying of thirst in a desert that water exists somewhere on the planet. Technically true, but practically useless. For Death Company Dreadnoughts specifically, the hope of following Mephiston's example is even more remote. The conditions that allowed his recovery, physical entrapment, extended isolation, the specific configuration of psychic ability and willpower he possessed, cannot be replicated for a warrior already sealed in a sarcophagus and interfaced with a machine spirit. The very factors that make Dreadnoughts so durable also make any form of psychological breakthrough essentially impossible. There is despair in the statistics. Blood Angels keep meticulous records of every brother who falls to the curse, tracking the progression from first symptoms to final death. These records show that the Black Rage has increased in frequency since the opening of the Great Rift. More brothers fall to it now than in previous centuries. The genetic flaw seems to be worsening, possibly influenced by the increased warp turbulence that the Cicatrix Maledictum has brought to the galaxy. For a chapter that has struggled with this curse since the heresy, the increasing frequency represents an existential threat. If the trend continues, eventually the Death Company will outnumber the battle companies. The chapter will become an army of the mad, effective in battle, but fundamentally broken. Some dark prognostications suggest this is inevitable, that the Blood Angels and all their successors are racing toward a moment when the last sane brother falls and the entire bloodline becomes nothing more than Death Company, effective warriors, but lost souls. This possibility haunts Commander Dante, oldest of the chapter masters, who has seen the curse claim countless brothers over his millennium of service. He carries the burden of knowing that his chapter is dying by degrees, that every day might bring the Black Rage to another brother, and that there is nothing he can do to stop it. The weight of this knowledge has pressed down on him for so long that some whisper it is only duty that keeps him alive, that if he allowed himself to rest, the despair would destroy him. Yet Dante continues, and in his continuation is another form of hope. If he, bearing the genetic flaw like all Blood Angels, can survive for over 1,000 years without falling to the Black Rage, perhaps the curse is not as inevitable as it seems. Perhaps there are factors that provide resistance, traits that could be studied and replicated. This hope drives the Sanguinary Priests' research, their endless examinations of gene seed and blood, their desperate search for any pattern that might suggest protection. For the Death Company Dreadnoughts themselves, if they possess any awareness beyond their madness, hope and despair are probably meaningless concepts. They exist in a state beyond such considerations, locked in eternal combat against enemies that cannot be defeated because they exist only as psychic echoes. Their experience is neither hopeful nor despairing, but simply endless, a recursive nightmare that continues until the sarcophagus is finally breached and the life within extinguished. Those who maintain them, who deploy them, who pray over them, carry the hope and despair for them. Every chaplain who speaks the liturgies of the lost hopes that this time the words will penetrate, that this time the lost brother will hear and respond. Every tech marine who repairs a damaged walker hopes that the next battle will be the last, that final peace will come through honorable destruction. Every battle brother who fights alongside them hopes that their ancient comrades will recognize them, just for a moment, will remember the brotherhood they once shared. And every time these hopes are disappointed, the despair grows a little deeper. But it never grows deep enough to stop the cycle. The Dreadnoughts are awakened, they are deployed, they fight, they rampage, they are contained, they are placed back into stasis, and the wheel turns again, as it has turned for centuries, as it may turn for centuries more. Hope and despair chasing each other in an eternal spiral that mirrors the madness it sustains. Perhaps the only true hope, the only resolution that makes sense in the context of the 41st millennium, is not cure or recovery, but acceptance. Acceptance that these warriors have given everything, including their sanity, in service to something greater than themselves. Acceptance that their suffering has meaning, even if it cannot be alleviated. Acceptance that sometimes duty demands sacrifices, so terrible that no glory can redeem them, and yet they must be made anyway. The Blood Angels have learned this acceptance through 10,000 years of living with their curse. They honor their Death Company dreadnoughts, not despite their madness, but including it, recognizing that the madness itself is part of the sacrifice. They do not try to minimize or explain away the horror of what these warriors endure. They acknowledge it fully and declare that it is sacred nonetheless, that the suffering itself has been sanctified by the purpose it serves. This is a hard hope, one that offers no comfort to those who bear it. But it is the only hope that survives contact with the reality of what it means to be a blood angel, to carry Sanguinius's blood and his curse. It is the hope that says, even broken, we serve. Even lost, we fight. Even in madness, we remain loyal to the Emperor and the angel whose death we carry in our genes. And for Death Company dreadnoughts, sealed in their sarcophagi and lost to visions of ancient betrayal, perhaps this hope is enough. Perhaps somewhere in the depths of their madness, some fragment of the warriors they were understands that their suffering is not meaningless, that every enemy they destroy is one fewer threat to the Imperium, that their existence, however terrible, serves a purpose worthy of the sacrifice. Or perhaps not. Perhaps there is no understanding, no meaning, no purpose they can grasp. Perhaps there is only the vision, looping eternally, Sanguinius dying again and again, and the rage that demands they continue fighting, even though the war was lost 10,000 years ago. Either way, they endure. And the chapter endures with them, carrying its lost brothers into battle after battle, hoping against hope that someday, somehow, there will be peace for these ancient warriors who have given everything and received only madness in return. But until that day comes, the Death Company dreadnoughts fight on, walking tombs filled with fury and sorrow, serving the Emperor in ways that break the heart to contemplate. They are the Blood Angels' deepest shame and greatest pride, the living proof of both the curse that afflicts them and the nobility that compels them to serve despite it. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and for some warriors, there is not even the mercy of death to end it, only the eternal cycle of madness, violence, and fleeting moments when those who love them dare to hope that somewhere beneath the adamantium and the rage, their brothers still remain. If this script has helped you understand the terrible beauty of the Blood Angel's sacrifice, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. We explore the deepest corners of Warhammer 40K lore, bringing you stories of heroism and horror from across the galaxy. The Emperor protects, but sometimes protection comes at a price no one should have to pay. Thank you for watching, and may Sanguinius watch over you.